Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Am I audible to everyone? Perfect. Hello, everyone. I welcome you all to another weekly event by the Allied Project. Allied stands for Allies for Leading, Learning, Inclusion, and Education of Disabilities. I'm very happy to have you all, and I'm very happy to present Mr. Sina Bahram, the world's leading expert on digital accessibility. I have a conversation with one of our project directors, Professor Mona Minkara. I'm happy to present them, and I'm going straight into the conversation between them.
Okay, welcome everyone for another event put to you by Allied. Today we have a really amazing and guest speaker with us today. Sina Bahram, he's a good friend, but he's also one of the world's leading expert in digital accessibility, and he has his own company. So he's the president and founder of Prime Access Consulting. Go ahead, Sina, do your thing.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. What we do at PAC, or Prime Access Consulting, PAC for short, is really focused on digital accessibility, but also inclusive design, you know, in general. So think physical and digital spaces. How do we welcome the widest possible audience?
That's really awesome. So let's begin, actually. For everybody who's listening, I think a lot of us might have the question of, what is digital accessibility?
Yeah, I think at its core, digital accessibility is the ability of all people, independent of whether or not they rely on assistive technologies, to use your digital offering, whether it's a website, augmented reality app, desktop application, or interactive inside of a gallery, whatever the digital thing is. It's the ability of all people to use it, whether or not they depend on assistive technologies like a screen reader or like sign language and captioning being available and things of that nature.
So why do you think digital accessibility is important?
It's important because 20 to 25% of the world's population have a disability. And so that's around 1.5 to 1.9 billion people in the world. That's number one. Number two is that folks with disabilities often interact with technology in varying ways, because technology is not always built for everyone. And so when you think about somebody who's blind, for example, like myself or you know, we use a screen reader. And so if a website can't operate, isn't, you know, coded correctly, then it's not going to be accessible, which means that you're unable independently, let's say, to do your taxes or make a medical appointment or watch your favorite Netflix show. And so when we look at this from an equity and participation point of view, it's incredibly important that we include as many people as possible in our global discourse. That's the first part of it. The second part of it, it's a legal mandate, right? In this country and many others around the world, accessibility is the law, whether it's established through case law or specific legislation. And so it's important to get this stuff right. And also, when we do get it right, it's not just for those people, quote unquote, right? It's for all of us, because these things that we do to make things more accessible, they also improve the experience for absolutely everybody.
So as a you know, somebody attending today, are there like guidelines related to accessibility? Are there specific rules that one has to uphold? Like, can you tell us a little bit about that? Yeah.
Sure. So there's a couple of things. When we talk about websites and content on the web, but also, for example, think mobile apps and things of that nature, the most common set of rules that's referred to is something called WCAG. WCAG is the pronunciation of WCAG. And WCAG is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, right? So these are the set of standards published by the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium. It's the group of folks that define what HTML is, what CSS is, you know, things like this. And accessibility is one of those other sets of guidelines that's been codified that way. So it has success criteria and rules and different levels of conformance, just like any other mature development standard, right? And when that is followed, and when the spirit of those guidelines are followed, not just the letter of those guidelines are followed, then you really can create some very inclusive and equitable experiences. So that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I wanna hone in on something that you said. When the spirit of those rules are followed, what do you mean by the spirit?
Well, oftentimes, when standards are put into place, there's various things, like the language really matters. For example, whenever it says should versus must, right? Like this is something that you and I might read a sentence and get the same definition either way. But if you're reading the standard very carefully, should and must have different meanings, right? And so if you're trying to just comply with the bare minimum, then what you can do is read the standard in such a way that, essentially doesn't really achieve the outcome that you want. It's just the bare minimum you're trying to do so as to pass a set of rules, so as to kind of pass the exam. And so the idea when I say the spirit should be followed is that when WCAG refers to things like heading levels in a document, it's important to use headings correctly. When it talks about color contrast, it's not just about meeting those 3:1 or 4.5:1 ratios. It's about making sure that the colors we're using really are cognizant of things like color blindness and also just good legibility and readability of text. It's that sort of determination where we're designing with, compassion and maturity, not just trying to meet the bare minimum requirements.
Yeah, so I mean, there might be some people out there that are kind of skeptical about the amount of effort this might take. Can you talk a little bit about like why it's worth making things digitally accessible? Of course, it's part of the law, but like,
yeah, sure.
Give me like a tangible example.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I disagree with the premise of the question, because the premise of the question acknowledges incorrectly that it is more effort, and also that the effort is being applied post facto. And both of these things are not the way that we should do things. So first, let's start with the basics, which is that my assertion to you, and this is shared by many brilliant people around the world, is that when you design things correctly, then not having that be accessible means that we failed at the design phase. It doesn't mean that we didn't consider accessibility and we've got a great design. You don't have a good design. You have a terrible design. And the reason is that the function of design, the role of design, is not decoration. Right? Decoration is when you're picking between two of the fancy pillows and deciding which one to put on the couch. Design is making sure the couch can withstand somebody's weight when they sit on it. So let's first understand what we mean when we talk about design. We're trying to communicate our services, our concepts, our products, whatever it is, to the world. And we use design as a mechanism of doing that. Good design is accessible design, full stop. There's no conversation to be had beyond that point where we talk about whether it's worth it to make something that is well designed accessible. The question is then invalid because it's not well designed to begin with. So first I want to establish that. Now let me continue with your question, which is, all right, let's say we acknowledge that good design is accessible and inclusive design. Then how do we do that? Because it's not something that maybe we're used to doing, and therefore the perceived efforts and costs and deleterious effects are coming from this need for us to change our mindsets and processes. That definitely has some cost associated with it. And that cost that has been incurred is basically debt because it wasn't done 5 years ago. It needs to be done now. That doesn't mean it's going to be done overnight. That doesn't mean that the expectation on either side should be that it's going to get fixed in just, a very short amount of time. But it means that we have to be thinking about, just like how we're thinking about so many things in our society right now, how we've been doing things and how we should be doing things. Those are not the same thing.
Yeah.
And how we should be doing things needs to involve as many people as possible being served.
I would love to interject right now and just like give an example from my perspective that I'm dealing with, which is as a researcher and a scientist, I have been trying to access a lot of journal articles out there, and they're all in these PDFs that are not accessible to me. So
Correct.
are you saying that this is like an example of something that should have been done but hasn't been done yet?
That's
And
right.
what we can do? Yeah.
That's exactly correct. And let's break that down just a little bit. The should have been done exists across a couple of different areas. One of them is the authoring tools that are available to people. Some people author in LaTeX, other people author in Word and InDesign and things of this nature. How do you get that to a PDF? There's a whole pipeline conversation to be had there. But then also, the responsibility needs to be considered at the conference and journal and professional bodies level. For example, as a computer scientist, my organizational body is the ACM, right? And so ACM and IEEE and folks like that, they have hundreds of thousands of papers that are inaccessible, like you're saying. And part of the reason for that is because they don't mandate accessibility, and they could have. They don't mandate accessible templates, and they could be. They don't set up the resources to enable and empower researchers to figure out how to do these things accessible, so we don't shift that burden onto somebody who's just trying to publish their amazing paper, and we instead set people up to win. That's, you know, there's a systematic failure going on at multiple levels that we should acknowledge, because that's what needs to change in order to then make it possible for everyone to seamlessly create inclusive content.
So we have a lot of people who are here that, you know, they're here because they want to be allies and they really want to, you know, be part of making the world a better place and being,
Sure.
you know, making things more inclusive. So do you have very specific tangible tasks or examples of things that they can go home as soon as we're done here and apply for them, you know, in their lives from a digital accessibility perspective?
Yeah, it depends on what they're doing, right? So if we're talking about researchers, for example, be thinking about the ways that your research is consumed by persons with varying abilities. So if somebody can't see the diagram in your paper, is there a visual description that goes along with it? That not only helps somebody who can't see the diagram, it helps absolutely everybody. I've had countless conversations with sighted colleagues that cannot understand a graph in somebody else's paper. So I assure you that's not a problem specific to not being able to see it. It's just that you have no chance if you're unable to see it. So that's one simple thing. But others,
where do they go though? Where do they go, Sina, to actually apply this? Let's say there's a professor who's about to publish and they really want to implement this. Where can they go to learn how to implement this visual description?
So it depends on how they're authoring it, right? So for example, if it's a PDF file, the images can be tagged in the PDF with the visual description, right? If it's a web page, on the other hand, then one uses something called the alt attribute in HTML to put the visual description in. Or if you're using like a learning management system or content management system, a lot of those things have a field for the alt text or visual description. And that's one, just to be clear, that's one basic example. There's many other things like use of headings in a document, for example, and the colors that we are choosing. So I think part of this comes down to a little bit of education being necessary, you know, in terms of what the specifics are that you can do immediately versus in the long term. And one of the resources that I can share with you along those lines is an article I wrote for AAM. This is in the museum world, but it applies to absolutely every piece of digital content, and we can include that as part of this presentation's, you know, just notes, so people can go to that article and see what we mean when we talk about heading order and color contrast and alt text and stuff like that.
That would be great to have that resource just so people can start looking and implementing. I think that a lot of people want to implement this change. They want to start, you know, making things more accessible. They just don't know where to go. Right. So it'd be great to take that information and share it with everyone. Okay, so alt text or descriptions of visual images. What's another tangible thing that people can implement?
Yeah, I mentioned a few in the last answer, right? So like headings, for example, are oftentimes really critical, because if you're reading a paper and need to jump to the you know, description of the implementation or the analysis section, it's really painful if you're unable to jump between sections. Visually, we can scroll and see where the next section is. That's where headings come into play. And so using those appropriately is a very easy way of adding that navigational aid and structure to a document. That applies to Word documents, that applies to PDF files, that applies to the web. It's sort of a universal concept in document layouts, right? Other things involve things like color contrast. Imagine using the colors red and green instead of two other ones that are equally as appropriate, but then aren't as problematic for somebody who's colorblind, right? So things like this are some of the basics in terms of improving the digital accessibility of a document.
Okay, very nice. So one last question for today. You have all of our ears. What is one thing that you wish society would change with regards to digital accessibility or even accessibility at large?
I think it has to do with expectations. We are currently very much okay with projects, whether it is a large building being constructed, a digital project being built, a website, a mobile app, anything along those lines. We're very much okay societally right now with it being born inaccessibly, right? Whereas we would not be okay if so many other things were wrong with it. For example, if the video was upside down, I mean, it would just be amateurish. Like it wouldn't even pass the review that you're having the intern do, much less go through a publishing workflow and get put into the real world, right? Yet, for accessibility, we don't apply that level of rigor. You're right. We do for security these days. We don't for accessibility, right? We do for copy editing, right? If your paper is full of typos and grammatical mistakes, that's not considered good or professional. And yet, we don't apply that judgment when it comes to inaccessible documents. And so I think expectation and raising that baseline is the fundamental thing we can do. And the advantage to it is that it doesn't mean you have to have technical knowledge, because that's something that you can bring up in every meeting, whether you're working on your personal nonprofit over the weekend, or whether you're working on an academic project, or whether you're working in a restaurant and wondering about accessible menus, right? Whatever role in society you have, there is a way of raising that baseline expectation of inclusion so that it can make everybody's work better and more equitable, so more folks can appreciate it.
That's really awesome. Thank you so much, Sina, for your insight and your input today. And, we'll see what kind of questions people have.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I hope that you find Mr. Sina's talk insightful and informative. Now, I know you will have a lot of questions regarding digital accessibility. So we have Professor Mona Minkara, and we also have Northeastern's user experience librarian, Meg Mehoen, to answer your questions. So anyone who has questions can just unmute yourself and go on with the questions. Professor Minkara.
Hello, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed that. Mr. Sina Bahram is a good friend of mine, and is actually, like, we were able to sit down and record it in advance because, schedule is really busy, but I hope this provided some kind of insight, some food for thought. Anybody have any questions?
How can we get hold of the AIM paper that he talked about?
That's a really good question. We actually have the link. And so what we can do is put it on the Allied website, and I can try to send out an email. I think we have, if you're coming here today, as usual, we always have a place where you can go in and fill out a survey, so we can get everybody's emails too, and we can send it out there.
Thank you.
How does that help? Okay.
That helps a lot. It was just an outstanding talk. Thank you.
I mean, I also have to bring it to everybody's attention. So we have Meg McMahon. Is that how you say your name? I think. Okay. And I'm gonna give her the floor in a little bit, but basically, like, she's also a resource. She has a list of resources that Northeastern just gathered to related to digital accessibility. So I'll be giving her the floor very shortly. And I would pay really close attention to what she has to say. Okay. Any other questions? So actually, Megan, if I could have you come to the front and maybe give a little bit of a spiel. I really liked what you wrote to me. So maybe like bringing awareness to, to everybody who's listening and sharing information. So here's Meg McMahon. I think I'm saying your name right.
Yeah, you got it. Awesome. Hello, I'm Meg McMahon. I use they, them pronouns. And yeah, no worries. And for resources for learning more, right? So there's a couple of places where you can learn more about digital accessibility through Northeastern. If you look up the Digital Resource Center, they have a staff and faculty page that links out to many resources specifically for staff and faculty on how to help make your courses, Canvas sites, things like that, more accessible. I will also say ITS within their knowledge base has a large list, well, not a large list, but it's a decent sized list of places where you're able to learn more that are directly tailored towards Northeastern University's properties that we have. Whether that's Canvas or the resources that we have through Canvas, for example, like Immersive Reader, which is right now on a trial basis for our Canvas instance, you would say. An Immersive Reader is for folks who have dyslexia or need different type of textual visual cues for their reading. I have to look at my notes because I wrote many. We also in the library have a accessibility for persons with disabilities web design accessibility libguide, which you can go to, and we link out to a lot of resources that exist on the web in that libguide. And ITS also has a knowledge base article on how to check Qualtrics for accessibility. So if you use Qualtrics in your work, it would be a really great idea to go there as well. And I know I just like spewed a bunch of information at you. And once again, the folks who put on this wonderful event have the links to all the things I mentioned and a little bit more. And I assume that can go out with the email that we were speaking about sending out to you before. Does anyone have any questions about any of that I mentioned? Yes, what's your question?
So I want to know, like, are there any like any advice that you would give any of our like attendees on how to apply digital accessibility or like how to interact with it, like anything that you personally feel like would be nice to share with the community right now at large?
Yeah, so I know that Professor Mona said in the talk about journal articles not being accessible because of the PDFs not being accessible. And that's like a large problem. I think that I've noticed across campus where faculty and staff don't necessarily know what makes an accessible PDF. And that doesn't only affect faculty members who are unable to access it, but it also affects students who are unable to access it. And a lot of that work is being put onto the Digital Resource Center currently right now to create like band-aids to many things that happen across campus when it comes to inaccessible learning materials for students. So I would say something that I would encourage specifically faculty and staff to look into is what makes an accessible PDF. You know, tabbing through on your keyboard using like the tab key to see if like it has accessible headings and you can read through. Once again, that's like it's like a little training that I don't believe Northeastern has, but it's something that if you're curious about, you can look up how to tell if a PDF is accessible, and you yourself would be able to learn a couple of ways that people check to see if PDFs are accessible. Some other things that I would say specifically to think about is once again, ITS has a lot of information on how to make a Canvas course accessible. There's like a on-demand training that you can take. And I think that would give you a lot of ideas about how to make your own classes accessible for students. And it even talks about the Canvas's accessibility checker, which is a thing that we have with our Canvas instance here at Northeastern. And I see someone here says, thank you. We would love to get links to resources. As new staff, it's hard to navigate what resources exist. So it would be great to bookmark specific pages to ensure we're supporting our students with accessibility needs. And I think that that's something that the library is working on too. Something I didn't mention that I think is really cool is that we're hiring an online and accessibility learning librarian at the library currently. We're doing job talks right now for that position. So hopefully within the next month or two, we'll actually have that librarian here on campus. And that librarian is going to be helping with some of these gaps that we're noting here. Once again, I don't believe that it's just on the libraries to think about accessibility, but know that we really care about it. And we're creating structures within our own organization to help the campus community with accessibility. That was a lot, once again. I realize. Does anyone have any other questions, or Professor Mona, would you like to come up?
I just wanna, you don't have to go.
Oh, okay.
There might be questions for you, but I just wanna reiterate, like, it might be daunting, it might be a lot, but you can just start with something really simple and just say, okay, I have this document, or I have a PowerPoint presentation that I show in my class next class. I'm just curious, how do I make sure that it's accessible? You can even start something smaller and be like, I'm about to tweet. I'm gonna put an image out there. You can literally Google, how do I make my, how do I alt text my image for Twitter? Something like that. Like if you start with one simple task, it might actually like open up the door of understanding for future tasks to come. I know it's like, it seems like a lot of work, or it seems like, it's daunting, but trust me, it's like, if we all work together, like one step at a time, we'll get there. It makes a difference. As a consumer of somebody, like, I am myself a screen reader user. It makes a huge difference when something comes to me and it's accessible versus when it's not. And unfortunately, 95% of the time it's not. So, we can be, as Northeastern individuals, we can be part of, the movement, the innovation to actually change the standard. I really like what Sina said, that we're okay with things being born inaccessibly. But you know what? We can be one of the forerunners and innovators in that area, and we can work together. So anybody have any other questions for either me or Meg?
There's a question here that says, what is something people would not think of that's a major barrier to digital accessibility?
I mean, think about how often you go on a website and you just browse. Like as a screen reader user, if the website is not accessible, that's completely out. It's literally, it's like the equivalent of being illiterate in the digital world. And I want access to the same type of information. I don't know if that actually answers that question, but like a lot of plots, graphs, pictures, images, all of that are inaccessible.
Yeah. There's another question that I'm seeing too,
Yeah.
is do you
Thank you,
have,
Meg.
yeah, of course. Do you have examples that are accessible, great PDFs or great websites?
I make my website very accessible. There are PDFs. I can't think of one off the top of my head. Like there are definitely, I would just Google like accessible PDFs and hopefully things will come up. But if you want to go see an accessible website, like a lot of the websites geared to the blind community are accessible because the blind community is using them. They tend to not be as visually exciting. So
Yeah, there's also,
Yeah.
I just want to point out something that's kind of fun, that especially if you're just on the beginning on this journey, there's a website called Accessibility Maze, and it's game-based, and it helps you understand,
oh my God, that's great.
yeah, what a inaccessible website is like for a user who uses a screen reader or a keyboard. So it actually helps you start to learn the keyboard yourself, as someone who is sighted, and how someone like moves about the web using the keyboard. And it helps you understand like the pitfalls that a lot of people experience on the web.
Yeah, that's really awesome. We'll put that out there too. Okay, yeah, we're gonna be sending out a nice, hefty set of information, but like definitely if you can, I think, Josh, did you post a link to the what do you call it? Today's survey? Yeah. So we'll have, hopefully, if you're okay sharing your email, then we can spread that information out.
I'm trying to think.
Any other questions?
Yeah, that seems to be the last one that's on there.
Meg, thank you so much for coming. Like, I really appreciate it. And please, thank you, all of you out there, for coming. This is an interesting topic, and it's, it's going to take all of us as a community to like actually make a change. So thank you, all of you, for coming here and listening. And yeah.
I would like to thank Mr. Sina Bahram, Professor Minkara, and Meg for this wonderful session. I'm going to post the link for the survey. I would request you all to fill up the survey. It's in the chat right now. And I'm also sharing my screen for a QR code where you can just scan the QR code and fill out the survey. I also have some important announcements to make. We have next week at the same time at 3 p.m. in ISAC 3655, and using the same Zoom link, we have Dr. Mary Barros here, who heads the Disability Resource Center at Northeastern. She's going to come and talk about how DRC, the Disability Resource Center, is helping students be successful in Northeastern.